Hello everybody, and welcome back to my channel, She, Her, Literate. Today is November 6th, the day after Election Day, and filming this today is a choice, but I need a distraction, and I have been putting this off for a really long time, so I did want to get this filmed and get it uploaded on YouTube so that I could focus on doing, whatever I want to do next, and I'm excited to celebrate being done with these two very chunky books. I filmed the intro for this almost like 2 months ago now, and I was in Houston at the time, and I think I did it lying down from my hotel bed. So I do want to film this intro. I don't know which one is going to make it on, and maybe I'll give like a little clip of my hotel intro, but I think I probably want to do this sitting up. So the content of this video is a deep dive analysis into The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James, and the book that inspired it, which is Daniel Deronda by George Eliot. So just some history, Daniel Deronda was published first. It was published in 1876, and Henry James had some caustic remarks about it, particularly about the focus on Judaism and what I will call Proto-Zionism, because Zionism wasn't a concept at the time that George Eliot wrote this book, but it was about one of the main characters, and I'll go into this in more detail later, finding out that he is Jewish and becoming more and more involved in the Jewish community in London and in continental Europe, but then being convinced that the true place for Jews and the only place where they will be happy is in Palestine, what is now modern day Israel. And Henry James, it seems to me, was coming from a pretty anti-Semitic place when he made fun of George Eliot's work, and I think that was just par for the course at the time. I'm not excusing anti-Semitism, obviously, but I just think that was publishable content in 1878 or whenever he published the criticism of Daniel Deronda. The Portrait of a Lady is based off of Daniel Deronda, but it's based off of the first half of the book, or I would say the first narrative of the book, since Daniel Deronda is split up into narratives following two main characters and how their paths intertwine. But the first one is Gwendolyn Harlith, and her storyline, which I think is really compelling. And the second narrative is following Daniel Deronda, and I will get a little bit more into my actual critique and analysis of the book. The Portrait of a Lady was published in 1880, and it is solely based off of the Gwendolyn Harlith part. There is no Judaism in it. What I want to do today is focus on comparing some of the main themes between those books. The themes that I want to focus on today are marriage and the place of women in society, which is a very central theme in Victorian literature. Identity, which I think comes up a lot in both books, both in a more superficial way about genealogy or heredity or belonging to a certain group, but also in a more egoistic way, and I mean ego in terms of like the discrete, unique ego, not like self-centeredness, but knowing what is it that makes you, you, that makes me, me, and what are my values, my morals and ethics, and how do I stay true to myself throughout hardship. And I think both of those books focus on that a lot. Thirdly, I want to talk about abuse, and none of this will be graphic. I don't think that there are any content warnings that I need to add, because it will all be very Victorian in the discussion, but there is definitely some emotional abuse, and I guess spoiler alert. But let me get first into describing the plot summaries of both of the books. It's been so long, so hopefully I remember them. Daniel Deronda, like I said earlier, is split up into two narratives, the first being Gwendolyn Harlith's and the second being Daniel Deronda's. Gwendolyn Harlith's narrative is that she is a very beautiful young girl, I think of about 19 or 20, and she comes from impoverished gentility, so I would say middle upper class, but her mom is a single mother who remarried and I think both of her husbands died, and so she has this, 4 daughters, a la Lizzie Bennet a bit. Obviously, women can't fend for themselves financially in polite Victorian society. So Gwendolyn Harleth is, out to find a suitor. But Gwendolyn is a very interesting main character. She is beautiful, but she's also very brash. She is reckless and impulsive and often mean and malicious, but has like a considerate and compassionate streak. So I just think that she's very three-dimensional, very nuanced, and that George Eliot did a great job, and it follows her path through, rejecting all these suitors to finally getting married, for financial reasons, but also because she does think that she loves this man, and then ending up in this unhappy marriage that where everything was not as it seemed. Daniel Deronda's narrative is that he is thought of as the illegitimate son of a baron, and he is a gentleman, but obviously like not recognized, so he does not have a legacy that he will inherit. And I would say that his part of the book is basically about figuring out who he is, both in terms of his birth and his birth parents, but also in terms of what he wants to stand for and what his values are. Portrait of a Lady focuses on Isabel Archer, who is a young woman, also about 19 or 20, at the beginning of the book, from Albany in the US. Her parents die, she's orphaned, so she goes traveling with her aunt in Europe, and is also very beautiful, but extremely intelligent, has really great aspirations for herself. She wants to do something great, but she doesn't quite know what that means or what that is. I think something that the novel beats around the bush about is that greatness for women has a pretty narrow scope in that time period in the late 19th century. It is hard for Isabel to see a future for herself that she actually wants to subscribe to, but she does end up getting married, and you can really draw a lot of the parallels between Daniel Deronda and A Portrait of a Lady, because she does end up in this unhappy marriage where she is emotionally manipulated, and she finds out things about her husband that would definitely have altered her opinion of him when they were courting. So let's get into the first theme, which is marriage and the woman's place in society. George Eliot, as a woman, I think is much better equipped to narrate the woman's psyche and internal dialogue than Henry James. There's something lacking in the credulousness of Isabel's narrative, and it's a little muddled, so it's not as clear, whereas with Gwendolyn Harleth, it's really easy to see, how her being a woman affects how she sees the world, how the world sees her, what is possible for her in society. She does not want to get married. She really likes being admired, but she has this almost prudishness around actually being like made love to, which is like flirted with or courted seriously by the men around her. As her family is fine financially in the beginning, this is seen as like endearing. It's fine, she's young, she has time, but later, because her family falls into dire financial straits, the pressure is definitely put on for her to make a match and find a suitor and marry someone who has the means to take care of not just her, but also her entire family. And she actually goes through this process where she is really trying not to get married, and she's like, maybe I can work, maybe I can act, maybe I can sing. She really, because she's so not frivolous, but kind of like temperamental, and she also, like Isabel, sees great things for herself. She doesn't want to become a governess. She finds that really abhorrent. So this is where it differs from, let's say, Jane Eyre. Jane is a very different main character, even though that book is also about what woman can do to support herself financially and how a marriage can make all the difference in a woman's life, and the man not quite being what he seems. But it's a little bit different from that, because Gwendolyn really wants to be in showbiz, and she actually talks to a musician, and he says, if you had started when you were 5 or 6, you would be maybe able to compete with people, but because you're starting at 19 or 20, you just simply don't have the skill. You don't have the passion for it because you're doing it for money. So it really does go through the whole process of why she ends up marrying, like why she decides to marry, and I think it's very believable and well done. On the other hand, The Portrait of a Lady it's not as clear. Isabel goes through the world. First off, she inherits 70,000 pounds from her uncle. She then travels Europe with that money, ends up settling down with Gabriel Osmond. It's really not clear to me why she makes that choice. And it's not clear to anyone in her life, but I think that Henry James does the book a disservice by putting us in the same category as the other people in the book. The audience should be enough in the main character's head that they understand why she's making the choices that she's making, even if the people around her don't. That makes it much more believable and much more relatable. Osmond has no money. Osmond has no status. All he has is that he has kind of good taste, and Isabel thinks he's handsome. But then it makes it a lot less understandable why she puts up with the power dynamic later in the book. And it could be that I just don't understand contextually what marriage was supposed to be in that time, and maybe to Henry James's audience and readers it was really clear why someone would put up with that, I guess because they had to be seen as respectable. But in the book it seems like they could have separated. Her aunt was essentially separated from her uncle and did not suffer from, a drop in social standing. So that was really not clear to me. But that is basically how marriage was treated as a financial step in these books. And I think that is very consistent with other Victorian novels. Almost all Jane Austen has to do with women who aren't able to fend for themselves financially, who need to make a marriage to do so. In terms of identity, both books have very capricious female main characters, and I'll talk about Daniel and Daniel Deronda a little bit later. But Gwendolen Harleth sees herself as a good person, and there's a lot of interesting content in Daniel Deronda about how she never actually had to grapple with good versus evil. She in herself, she always just put herself in the former category because she was never truly tested. And one of the plot points in Daniel Deronda that I think makes it a lot better, in my opinion, than The Portrait of a Lady is that in Daniel Deronda, she discovers before their marriage, that before they're even engaged, that he has an illegitimate family. Gwendolen promises the woman that she will never marry Grandcourt. That is because she has not gone through this financial tragedy that befalls her family later. And so she says, oh, of course I would never marry him. That would be the wrong thing to do. But then later, she's kind of put between a rock and a hard place because her family has no money. They're pressuring her to marry him. And so she kind of rationalizes internally, okay, maybe I can convince him to recognize the children and to divide some of his money up between that family. And so she decides to marry him, but then regrets it because she knows that it's the wrong thing to do. A large part of the novel is around how she works towards being a better person and becoming a better person. In the beginning of the book, she was also quite condescending. She would be kind of mean to her mom because she saw her as weak, and she was rude to other girls who she thought were uglier than her and things like that. So there is a very clear character growth arc, whereas in The Portrait of a Lady, Isabel doesn't really have to grapple with that at all, and she has to grapple with whether she's gonna leave her husband and marry one of her other suitors, or if she's just gonna be unhappy forever. But I did not feel that the tension was as believable because the stakes just simply didn't seem as high. It seemed Daniel Deronda wins here too. However, Daniel Deronda also has Daniel Deronda in it, which I would say really brought down my enjoyment of the book, unfortunately. I thought that I was gonna really enjoy the discussion about Judaism, but I found Daniel really insufferable. I understand that he was confused about who he was, and there was a lot of soul searching that happened in the book, but he was just such an annoying character. He was like a cardboard cutout. He was perfect all the time. It felt like every decision that he made was the virtuous, just right decision. and that's not very relatable content, and I just don't find that that's interesting. Like, that's not how you make a good hero. You want to put some flaws in there to bring out like how impressive it is when that person does do the right thing. I also found the romance between Daniel and Mira just like so boring. There's a lot of monologuing in the Daniel Deronda sections of the book. So unfortunately, that is kind of like a ding for Daniel Deronda. Finally, I'm going to talk about abuse. There is abuse depicted in both Portrait of a Lady and Daniel Deronda. This is where I think the Portrait of a Lady draws on Daniel Deronda the most. Henley Grandcourt is described as almost a sadist in a way. He wants Gwendolyn to be under his thumb and he wants to control her, and he enjoys seeing her broken. It is akin to when people break horses. They want the horse to have a strong will, so that is all the more impressive when then that horse does what they tell it to do. That is how Henley Grandcourt feels about Gwendolyn Harleth. And I think that it's really well done. It is easy to see how in this book she is emotionally manipulated and abused, both because as a woman and as the financial dependent in this marriage, she is totally dependent on Grandcourt, and he says that he could leave her and she would be nothing and she would basically starve and her family would starve. So she cannot tell anyone about what he's doing to her. She cannot complain to anyone, she cannot tell anyone about his illegitimate family to legitimize a separation if she were to seek it. In the end, Grandcourt dies. It is Deus Ex Machina in a way that I really did not enjoy. I'm happy that Gwendolyn got out of this abusive relationship and she realizes that it was better to be poor and to be free. Or I assume this is kind of romanticized because obviously, like, if you were actually poor in Victorian England, it was really, really hard, and I'm not trying to romanticize that. But in Gwendolyn's personal opinion, her level of financial income or whatever her family could, you know, scrape together was much preferable to being under Grandcourt's thumb. In The Portrait of a Lady, Osmond is similarly abusive, but he has no leverage over Isabel. He just hates her. He thought that he liked her, but he actually doesn't like her. That is essentially the basis for the unhappiness in their marriage. And he ignores her or says slightly like demeaning or derogatory things towards her. So I can see it is, I would classify it as domestic emotional abuse because he does say like verbally rude and malicious things towards her. He also deceives her about his daughter, who is actually illegitimate and between him and another character in the book rather than between him and his dead wife. So there is some deception happening in the book, and I can sympathize with Isabel, but I don't think that it makes as much sense to me, a reader in the 21st century. Yeah. So would I recommend Daniel Deronda or The Portrait of a Lady? I think I gave both about 3 stars on Goodreads, which for me means I enjoyed it. It was fine. I would recommend to a specific individual. Daniel Deronda, if you like George Eliot, if you like Middlemarch, if you've read Adam Bede or Silas Marner or any of the other ones, I would give it a try. If you have to skip the Daniel Deronda chapters, I won't tell anyone. Did I skim many of them on my Kindle? Yes, I did. But I do think that the Gwendolyn Harleth chapters are really, really well done, and some of the best depictions of women and the hardships of marriage for women that I've seen in Victorian literature. I would say the same thing for Middlemarch and the same thing for Adam Bede, so maybe that's just where George Eliot really shines. The Portrait of a Lady was also well written. It was just less believable. Neither of these were 5-star reads for me. So do with that what you will. I can recommend a lot of other Victorian novels. Honestly, I would recommend Middlemarch and Adam Bede highly. Like 5 stars. I loved those. I wanted to do some personal updates. Okay. I have been away from my home for a long time, almost a month. I was in Houston and then I was in New York City, and I will add some footage from New York City if I maybe like overlaying this. I really wanted to go into some cute bookstores and I failed to do that. I did go to the Strand, but I got no footage because I was with my husband, and that was embarrassing for me to be filming in the Strand when there were like a billion people in it. And I ran the New York City Marathon. So that was really exciting. That was really, really awesome. And it was a great, great time. So yeah, I had a great month, but it is nice to be back in California. Thank you all for watching this long and kind of rambling video where I hope that you enjoyed it, and let me know in the comments if you do end up reading The Portrait of a Lady or Daniel Deronda and have any thoughts about that. And I will see you next time.